We have reached a new level where we are singing songs about medical treatments in order to get kids to go along, presumably, or adults, who knows. I think when Paul said, speak to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, this isn't exactly what he meant. Welcome to Church Public. Let's get started. Well, again, welcome back to Church Public. I am your host, Matt Odegaard, and I really appreciate you coming by today. I know your time is valuable, and I appreciate it. Perhaps that's even why I talk so fast, or so I've been told. So if you have missed some of the previous episodes, you might be interested in them. You might not. But if you are on the audio podcast, thank you so much. You can go back and listen to all of the previous episodes there, whether you are on any of the platforms, really. If you are looking at the video platforms, you can look at these on YouTube as long as we are on there. We'll see what happens there. And you can always go to churchpublic.com, where I will try to archive the videos if they continue to stay up. At any rate, thank you so much for being a part of this and for helping. Your shares and likes and promotion helps this to go forward. This is a listener-supported endeavor, and as such, here at Church Public, we are trying to help you understand how to follow after Jesus with all of your heart and your soul and your mind, and how to enter into the public square, because that is where we live, that is where we work, that is where we go to school, and that is where we will interact with those that don't yet believe in Jesus or may one day, hopefully, know Jesus. But we really need to focus on how we live. And I'll talk more about this in a moment, but there are definitely two different paths diverging in American Christian life. And these are thoughts that I'm continuing to form. We'll talk a little bit about them today, and then I will form them more completely and share at a later date. But at any rate, there's a lot going on. And so today what I wanted to talk about, by and large, was this new liturgy. And as some of you know, I have been a worship leader for a couple of decades, actually more now that I think about it. But at any rate, worship leading and liturgy is really important to me. It's really important to me because through liturgy, you shape your heart. I think this is very true, and I think those that appreciate and understand and really like music will get this even more. That there is something about music that goes past the head and moves straight into the heart to where you connect spiritually, yes, also emotionally, and there is a danger there that I'm not going to talk about on this particular episode, but of course there are churches that exploit this emotional reaction that we have through music. At any rate, that's not my point today. My point is, through music, for thousands of years now, again, go back and read some of the Psalms, most of which were written as songs, that through music and through liturgy, we are able to connect to something greater. And I would posit that that something greater has more spiritual significance. Not that we should not use our mind. In fact, of course, I believe that we should. You can see the books over my shoulder. I read a lot of books. In fact, some people think I read too many books and say, talk to me like I'm 5. I really try to do that. I'm trying not to intentionally use big words so that we can all understand what's going on. Not that big words are bad in and of themselves, but we really want the most amount of people to understand what it's like to follow Jesus. And this involves all of us coming to a comprehension of what that looks like. So for many, doing songs and singing songs and participating in songs help us really get to that root core of what is involved. And in fact, some have said that this is a part of the problem of the American evangelical church, in that we've been too focused on the mind and not enough focused on the heart. I think both are extremely important. I don't think you can separate them. I think you have to love God with all of your heart. You have to love God with all of your mind and strength and all those other things. But this is really important. It's really important that we focus on loving God with everything that we have. But some have said as well that the journey from the mind to the heart is one of the hardest journeys of all. We have the most educated population, I think, than has ever been on the face of the earth. And yet we couldn't be less wise, and we couldn't be less spiritual in the sense that we have tried to reason everything away and rationalize everything away and replace God with all of these other things. And the fact of the matter is, you cannot. And that is why concurrently what we're seeing is the rise in all sorts of crazy things like tarot, Ouija boards, especially during this October time, this All Hallows Eve time. You're seeing all kinds of crazy witchcrafty things coming up. First of all, as an aside, don't fall into that. It is not neutral. It is not a game. They are real things. There are real, Paul says over and over again, this is not a battle of flesh and blood. This is a battle of spiritual warfare, and it is real and it is out there, and it will entice you and entrap you in any way that it can. So don't fall into that. But again, that is a side point. What I want to do today is talk about these wonderful, sorry, that was a little bit of sarcasm there. These songs that are coming out and being, I don't even know what to say, performed as we move into this newest line of cultural craziness. And so this is the latest in our, what used to be funny late night talk show hosts' endeavor. This is their endeavor to convince you of something. At any rate, I'll play this and then we'll talk about it. So this is the newest liturgy for our current culture. Here you go. All right, if you were just listening at home and you started humming along to the song because that is the famous or perhaps infamous song Tequila, again, made famous by Pee-wee and Pee-wee's Playhouse, which has its own issues, but it's a topic for another day. That was the famous, now infamous Stephen Colbert on his late night talk show singing about the vaccine. And again, if you couldn't see, I probably would say you're welcome. I'm glad you can't see. You probably shouldn't go watch. It's probably something you don't want to see. At any rate, it's him dancing in an awkwardly way. Again, some of us are not made to be dancers. I can count myself along in that count. But at any rate, it is him dancing with hypodermic needles. That's the only way I can describe this. There are several scantily clad hypodermic male needles. I don't even know what I'm saying anymore, but I'm just describing to you what you've just witnessed. At any rate, so this is what we are looking at, and this is the liturgy, dance, etc., in order to help us be inclined to follow the quote-unquote science and follow what this culture is telling us to do, because they know better than us what is good for us. I'm going to have more thoughts about this in just a moment, but I wanted to share that wonderful video with you because, unfortunately, I had to watch it, and so you do too. So if you haven't seen it, again, don't go watch it. It's really not worth your eyeballs, but if you had to just watch it as you were watching along, you're welcome, or I'm sorry, depending on how you feel. So that is the new liturgy, and I do want to play one more liturgy for you, and this is because this is as I've discussed often in the past, we have a culture of death, and we have all of our topics appear to be surrounding the idea of life and death. And we've talked about that at length. We've talked about that at length with abortion. It is a really important issue of this particular day, not just because God values human life, therefore we are supposed to value human life, but because this culture has made it such a prominent issue, and violently so. I did not grab the clip for you today, but I watched over the weekend a couple of pro-life demonstrations, largely women standing out there, some of them even pregnant themselves, getting literally beat up by pro-abortion supporters. I'm not kidding. They were standing there silently, nicely, holding signs and saying that life in the womb has value and that we shouldn't kill babies. They were actually getting punched and hit and knocked down, even the pregnant one. This is a problem with our society. This is not loving and empathetic, as we'll see in a moment. We'll look at that. But again, this liturgy is designed. It is designed specifically to push you in a certain direction. And I do want to show you one more that is a strange liturgy indeed, but I'm going to show you this one, and again, then we'll talk about it. And this comes out of a school. I don't know what school. It was a clip that went viral over the weekend, as far as I can tell, and it's just important to note and to point out because, again, in some schools, this is what's happening, and this is what we need to understand. I could guess where this comes from based on an accent that you hear in there, but it doesn't really matter. The point is, this is what the establishment. This is what the proletariat, this is what those that seek to control you want you and thereby your kids to understand. So here is another liturgy of the new cult.
To school, hi ho the Dario, I wear a mask to school. It helps to keep me safe. It helps to keep me safe. Hi ho the Dario, it helps to keep me safe. It keeps my friends safe. It keeps my friends safe. Hi ho the Dario, it keeps my friends safe. And let me see a hooray! Put your hands up in the air!
So, I mean, again, if you didn't hear that, it's just a video of some school-aged children all wearing their masks politely and penitently, perhaps, and singing along to this rather terrible song of what's that song called? Hi Ho Dario, or whatever the song is originally called. And again, I'm very familiar with things that they do in schools, and you appropriate songs as needed, and that's fine. I have really no problem with that. Obviously, the singing wasn't wonderful, but it is what it is. But the idea here is a song is worth 1,000 words, right? That's the picture analogy. But a song is true too, and a song, as I mentioned from the beginning, songs get into your heart where some things cannot and take longer too. And these songs are clearly designed to speedily get these kids to believe what they are being told. And again, I will probably get shut down for this, but I have not seen a study that shows that these masks, particularly for children, have efficacy. There was a study that came out that a person highlighted. I'm not even going to show the study at this point, and then was promptly reviled by the person who put out the study that they read it wrong, and no, it wasn't saying that masks help school children. It was actually saying the opposite, or at the very least, that there was no concrete evidence one way or another. And we'll get into some numbers in a moment, because the numbers are important, and the numbers help us understand that they how dangerous this really is to kids. And again, that's not particularly my main concern. My main concern here is liturgy, and we're going to look to Ephesians in just a moment, because that's where Paul talks specifically about liturgy, because liturgy, singing, songs, being in community with one another is a really important thing. It is a really important thing, and I want to keep hold of that, and that is a really important piece. But before we get to that, I want to talk to you about California. And as some of you know, some of you living in California, some of you escaped from California and know that the governor there has now added in a mandate for vaccines for all children. Now, of course, at this particular time, they are not allowed to have children under, I believe it's still, is it 16 or 12? It doesn't really matter, because at this point they're just waiting on the FDA to approve it, or whatever that means, and then it will be for all school-aged children. And this is the point, right? The point is the students need to be vaccinated to go to school. Students, staff, everyone need to be vaccinated to go to school. So I just, again, want to talk about some of the numbers, because the numbers are important. And I believe one demographic of America that has not been particularly affected by this life and death that we're talking about, specifically death in this case, and specifically in the virus in this case, is children, according to the CDC. These are not my numbers, according to the CDC, and it's changing daily, but the amount of children under 17 killed by this virus is somewhere in the 400s, mid 400s, at when I looked here. And this has been within a year and a half. There are so many things, I'm not even going to list them at this point, that kill more children per year than this. There are literally so many other things. This is not even near the top of the list. And yet we're seeing things like this, and we're seeing things that are really, really important, presumably, that we need to put children into masks and sing songs about how safe masks are and how masks keep them and their friends safe. And the reality is, again, this is 400 and some children killed. And according to Johns Hopkins as well, all of the children that were killed had some very severe pre-existing condition. That's according to Johns Hopkins. Again, not according to me. This is 400 out of 330 million people. If you break that down into just kids, it's somewhere in the 60 to 70 million. 400. just to be extremely obvious to the point, that is a very low number. This is a very low number, and it's important to keep that number in context, because we're being told by these wonderful little songs that it keeps me safe and it keeps my friends safe. Does it? Does this change? Does making these children have a vaccine, does making these children have a mask really change the dynamics at all? When we're talking about somewhere in the 400s out of 70 million or out of 330 million, is that a statistically significant number? For you mathematicians out there, you can draw your own conclusions. This is the issue. So, of course, California has said that these children must mask up always, and now must vaccinate. And I am getting all kinds of messages from friends that are still in California who have not been able to escape, trying to figure out what to do. Are they going to do private school? Are they going to do homeschool? Are they going to do other things? And this mandate apparently is also extending through private school. It is very unclear, and the exemptions are not clear. They apparently, as far as I can tell and as far as I've checked, the exemptions haven't even been written yet, which tells you they don't care about exemptions. They're trying to not have exemptions. If you look into New York and the healthcare mandate that just went into place, where some, again, different numbers, 30,000 to 70,000 different healthcare workers were released from jobs because they failed to comply with this mandate. And apparently, in that instance, there are no exemptions, religious or otherwise. So presumably, the same may happen in California. We have no idea. And as I mentioned on a previous episode, this administration of the federal government wants the whole of America to be like California. They have made that abundantly, perfectly crystal clear. So all of these friends that I have are trying to figure this out. And I'll say too, I am in a family where we homeschool, and we homeschool specifically for reasons like this, among others. There are a lot of reasons. And really, this isn't even the biggest reason for homeschool for me. And I'm happy to discuss that more and may do that at a later time. But the reason it's important have various things, both of which we've talked about on previous episodes, like critical race theory. I don't think that's good for any child to learn that type of ideology. It's just not. And among other things, the school, the general public school, just is not instructing from a Christian level. Sure, you can teach your kids Christian ideals, but if they're spending hours and hours and hours every single day in this environment, what are they being more influenced by? You or their teachers or other students? And the videos that they're watching, inevitably, especially on sites like TikTok, which we've talked about in the past, which please, please, please get your students off TikTok. I just saw that another like billion people were added this weekend, or some ungodly amount of number. Please get them off TikTok. There is no value there. At any rate, is the school system the best place for them? I'll have more on that at a later time. But we are quickly going to this place where, which line are you going to stand on? And I'm going to talk about Jesus' two gates in a moment. But we're going to go back to that again because I think it's important. But I also, before that, just want you to look back at Australia. And I know we're kind of going all over the world, and there is a point to that. And I know you're probably sitting there saying, no, I live in America. Australia doesn't have any bearing on me. England doesn't have any bearing on me. Canada doesn't have any bearing on me. And actually, even before we get to Australia, I just wanted to mention, I don't think I have the video of that right here. Let's see. No, I don't have a video of that right here, but pastor that we've checked on previous episodes, Archer Pavlovsky, was arrested again in Canada for the crime of not wearing a mask during one of his services or one of his outreach to the local homeless people. And he grew up in a communist area and saw persecution of Christians firsthand, and now says, according to him, that there are a lot of corollaries to what he grew up in, actual communism, and where he is now, Canada. And we've talked at length about Canada, and we are going to check in there again, but I want to look at Australia again for a moment. And I'm just going to flash some images, so if you cannot see, I'll describe some of them for you. There have just been all kinds of crazy arrests and things happening. The first image I'm looking at here is a woman being forcefully arrested, again, for the crime of not wearing a mask. The next one here is a guy. This was a video, but I decided just to show a screenshot. The video was a bit long, and if you're not watching, what happens is he is eating a sandwich and apparently smoking a cigarette, and then they essentially tackle him because he's some amount 300 or 500 meters outside of his 3K radius, because you are in this particular state only allowed to be, it's either 3K or 5K. I can't keep it straight. I don't know kilometers anyway, so it doesn't make any difference to me. Again, maybe you math or enlightened people can tell me how far that is. I don't really care, but you're only allowed to be within a certain radius of your household or work, if you are allowed to work. And he was taken down, forcefully handcuffed, because he was not wearing a mask in between bites of his sandwich or something like that. And then you have this lovely image of a person being maced or pepper sprayed directly in the face, again, to keep you safe, because you're not wearing a mask. So the pepper spray presumably will cover over the virus. I'm really not sure. Anyway, this is just the state of Australia. And again, like, I come back to Australia and I'm reading things. I decided not to pull clips and show a bunch of videos for Australia. You can go and look at them. They're terrible. There's women being choked, pepper spraying teenagers. I saw that. Indiscriminately firing rubber bullets and pepper bullets into crowds. Yes, that happened. Quarantine facilities that they're building and boasting about having that they'll be able to put people in for an indefinite amount of time. There's all sorts of app things happening where they take your phone or other device and use geolocation and picture taking to make sure you are where you say you are, and of course not where you're supposed to be, and then sending the authorities if you aren't. There are masks at the beach. I told this story before where I lived in California while the beaches were closed at the beginning of 2020, and you were arrested for going to the beach. Here's a great story. I was on the beach and we were looking at this, it was nighttime, and we were looking at this really amazing tidal phenomenon called blue tide, where bioluminescent algae, when it goes through the waves, it actually glows. It's incredible. While we were there, we had stopped for a moment on the beach outside at night to watch this phenomenon, and a wave of probably 10 police officers came down the beach and said, "You need to keep moving." And I was like, okay. And they're like, "You can't stand still," because apparently the order at the moment was, if you stand still on the beach, you get it. If you move, then it can't move fast enough to catch you. Again, it's all science, so trust the science on that one. But I'm telling you, these things have already happened here, are still happening here. You could say Australia is so far away, Canada is so far away, even though it's not that far away. England is so far away, but these are all westernized countries. And my point is this: what are you going to do now to ensure we don't get to this place in the future? And that really is the question. And you really have to begin thinking about this. What line is your line? When they say you can't go to church, which has already happened in many places like California and New York, will you say, no, we have to go to church? When they say you can't congregate in your home, which also has already happened in California, New York, and other places, are you going to do that anyway? When they say this year you can't have Christmas, what are you going to say?
But we can gather for Christmas, or it's just too soon to tell?
You know, Margaret, it's just too soon to tell. We've just got to concentrating on continuing to get those numbers down and not try to jump ahead by weeks or months and say what we're going to do at a particular time. Let's focus.
So there you go, from the man himself. It's too soon to tell if we can actually gather for Christmas. I mean, you know, I'll probably gather for Christmas because I'm the high overlord and director of the entire organization that tells you what's right or wrong. But you're not as sophisticated. If you have watched other episodes, you know that particular quote. You don't really understand what's good for you. So obviously, let's not talk about gathering for Christmas. Let's not get ahead of ourselves here, because that could be quite dangerous to gather with your family for Christmas. And I laugh and I make light of it because that's really the only thing we can do. We have to realize what we're talking about. And that is the question. What is your line? Where are you going to say, no, government, you don't get to regulate whom I hang out with and when. You don't get to regulate what I wear and how. You don't get to regulate what I put into my body and why. And again, you can go back and listen to a couple other episodes that I did, but Who is in charge of you? Is it you? Is it God? Is it the government? Those are questions that you have to deal with and have to wander through. And I can give you my opinion, and I have in past episodes, that I do believe that God is the ultimate authority, and he's the only one that has autonomy over you. And then secondly, you have autonomy over yourself. And only in limited case, as we read through in Corinthians and Ephesians and some other areas, that your spouse has some authority over you. But the government really doesn't have authority or autonomy over your body. They don't. They do make rules. They protect you. They protect certain rights. That is their job. But telling healthy individuals how to live and what treatment to use and what to wear is really outside of their purview, and we're reaching that area. So again, what is your line? Where are you going to say enough is enough? And as you're seeing in Australia, as you're seeing in Canada, as you're seeing in England and other places, those lines have already been crossed, and perhaps they're too far gone. I don't know. We're going to have to continue to monitor that situation. But if you believe we are too far gone in this country and we'll never get there, we'll never get to that place, you really haven't been paying attention, and we really have to mind what is going on. What I want to end with is, I do want to read this, and I said I was going to read it earlier, but this is Ephesians 5, as Paul is talking to the church at Ephesus, and so of course he's talking specifically to them, but as always in Scripture there are things we can draw from. There are things we can draw from here that apply to our churches and our very lives. So it is interesting to me that the beginning of chapter 5 is talking about being imitators of God. In other words, we are to look like God, look like Christ. The very definition of Christian is to be a little Christ, and to live a life of love just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us. But it goes on to say how we are not supposed to live. And it goes on to verse 15 that says, do not live as unwise, but live as wise, because the days are evil. Don't be foolish. Understand what the Lord's will is. Don't get drunk on wine. Instead, be filled with the Spirit. And that is a particular statement to the Ephesians, which apparently were getting too drunk, but it still holds universal truth of, it's not good for you to be drunk because you make really bad decisions. This is just true. But he goes on to say this, and this is where we started. Speak to one another with psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. Sing and make music in your heart to the Lord, always giving thanks to God the Father for everything in the name of our Lord Jesus. And then he does go into a lengthy talk on submission, which is interesting in connection to this, but we're not going to look at that today. The point here is we are to live for Christ. We're to give our lives for Christ. It doesn't say we're supposed to give our lives for the government. And again, I've talked about that in previous episodes. But we are supposed to sing hymns and songs to each other because it makes a difference. Because when we sing to each other, that helps us understand these truths. And we really have to get to the point where truth is the ultimate value. It is the ultimate value because, one, the very earth began by God speaking truth into it. 2, John 1:1. Jesus came into this world being the living embodiment of the truth, the Logos, and he came into this world to change it, to save it, to give us the prospect of salvation in the face of a holy God that cannot, hear me, cannot stand sin. We hear this where God is love, and therefore everything God does is loving. That's just not the fullness of the picture. Yes, God is love, and he cannot be unloving. However, he does hate things. He cannot stand sin. That is why we have no way to get to heaven without Jesus. That is the good news of the gospel, and it is the realization of the repentance that we need that leads us there through the kindness of God. Again, Paul talks about that at length. It is the kindness of God that leads us to our very repentance, because he gives us this grace that we cannot get on our own, that we cannot earn on our own. It is only something that is given through Jesus himself. So what does that mean for us? Well, it means that we're in a world that is dividing. And of course, it's always been divided in between light and dark, and good and evil, and those that follow Jesus and those that do not. But there is a subset, and there is a weird subset. And this subset is, there are Christians that follow this idea that God is love, and love wins. A very popular author has written a book of that title, which, by the way, is heretical. So that's not the end of God. Love does not conquer all in that sense. Love conquers all in the sense that because of our sins, we are unworthy, and because of God's love through Jesus, we are made worthy. But we still have to repent. We still have to follow after God, and we still have to change our ways. We don't get to just say love is love and then say because of that, God accepts us as we are. That's just not how it works. We need to change our ways. And that is the bottom line of us. This new liturgy says you are fine how you are. Listen to us, follow our culture, and we will save you. Unfortunately, the reality in this is this culture cannot save you. This culture only pretends to save you and pretends to conform you to them. Instead, Jesus says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I apologize, that was Paul, not Jesus, but the idea here is the same. And we do need to continue to do this. We need to avoid those leaders, evangelical or otherwise, that are saying live your truth. Instead, we need to not live by lies. We cannot live by the lies that's why these numbers are important. That's why I tell you the numbers, where how susceptible are children to this. That is an important fact. And while the social medias don't want you to hear that or see that or comprehend that, it is a truth that we must understand and thereby live with it, because Jesus said, I am the truth, and he came with the truth. And he says the only way to get to salvation is through Jesus, his truth, not your truth, not the world's truth, only through Jesus' truth. And that's where Jesus gets to this place where there are two gates. There is a wide and there is a narrow. There is only one way. The wide is the easy one. The narrow is hard to find, hard to follow. And yet it is the one that we are called to seek after. So again, this is the time. Don't let your community, your city, your state, your country go away in search of this new culture, in service to this new culture. Don't let them fall prey to this new liturgy, but rather speak to one another with psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. The truth. Speak to one another and sing to one another these true things so that we can follow after him with all of our heart and soul and mind and strength. This is and will be the only way that we can go through the narrow gate and follow Jesus as he has called us to do. Yes, we are called to love our neighbor, but first we are called to love God with all of our heart and all of our soul and all of our mind and all of our strength. This is the only way to God, and we need to act like it, and we need to stop bantering to this culture that isn't going to like us and isn't going to care anyway. Only God can save us, and we need to start following after him. The hard parts, the easy parts. It is not easy to follow after God. It's simple to get Jesus and to follow Jesus and to comprehend even this very gospel. But it is not easy to walk it day by day. That's why Paul continuously says, I continue to beat my body into submission, following after Jesus, and run the race like one who is in it. Don't just sit on the sidelines and pretend like this race and this life is passing you by. It is real, and it does matter what you do day to day. And I hope that you run it with perseverance, and I hope that you will continuously keep the faith. God bless.